on asking me to do this. 9-star key, like and I was saying, is one of those special forms or teachings within macrobiotics that has been around for a long time. I was introduced to it originally in 1978 when Michio was at the Cauchy Institute in London and decided to present it. And I thought it was kind of interesting, and I didn't do anything with it. Then another friend of mine, Rex LaSalle, and I began to converse more about it. And the more we dug down into it, the more we realized how useful it was, how helpful it was in so many ways. I'm not going to give a long distillation of the theory behind 9-star key, but basically what I would say is it goes by various names in different cultures. It's the house of Meiwas, or the system of Meiwas, or blemishes, birth blemishes, that happens with each one of us in the Tibetan tradition. It is 9-house astrology. It has now been called feng shui astrology. But basically what I would say is it's a system that's been around for maybe about 3,000 or 4,000 years. I think the original Tunhuang caves that found the tablets that had 9-star key charts on it was about that old. So it's a very, very old system of divination that's around it. It also is very connected to Vedic astrology, although many people in Vedic astrology or Jyotish don't really realize it. If you're familiar with it, anything in terms of Hindu iconography, if you had an opportunity to ever look at the symbols that are used to represent Shiva, he is usually represented on altars in Hindu houses by little sandals. And if you turn those sandals around and you look at the sole of the sandal, you'll actually find a 9-chambered chart with a number 5 in the middle. So basically what you can say is this has been around in various forms for many, many, many ages. The number 5 relates to the planet Saturn in terms of our earth elements. And therefore what I would say is the 9-star key is really about what Saturn is, which has to do with your life purpose, which is why if you took a regular Western astrology chart or a Vedic astrology chart and wanted to distill it down to its most essential aspects, you would end up basically it being a 9-star key understanding of the world. So some of you, it's very clear, I've been around the macrobiotic circles for a long time. That's very apparent. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start with the very simple, this very basic calculations. All right, so I'm now screen sharing. So you can all see the basic making your 9-star key year calculation. Now, many of the books that you have possibly looked at talk about doing a calculation with, adding the last 2 numbers together, reducing it to a single digit, and subtracting it from 10. Well, that only works from the year 1900 to the year 2000 or 1999. But a friend of mine who was a mathematician said, well, why don't we just see what we can come up with? And this is a chart that'll work for you from the year 0 to the year 3000. Okay, so when you come back in 3001 AD in your 50th incarnation from this point, you might have to do a new 9-star key chart. But until that time, if you ever discover 9-star key again, you will find that you can go back and use this particular method. So let's say we take a year. 1956 is what I give here. So you add all the numbers comprising the year together. So 1 plus 9 plus 5 plus 6, and that equals 21, okay? Now you take that 21 and you reduce that down to a single digit. So 2 plus 1 equals 3. And then you subtract that number from the number 11. Why 11? Because it works. Okay, it is one of those master Buddha numbers, and might be that that's the reason why it works, but this works. So you subtract 3 from 11, you end up with the number 8. If you did it the old style of 5 and 6 is 11, 1 plus 1 is 2. From the number 10, you'd end up with the number 8 as well. Okay, so 8 becomes 8, whether you do it with this system or whether you use the 10 system, which is in a lot of the old 9-star key books. All right, so this is your basic 9-star key year number. Now the 9-star key year begins and the midpoint between the winter solstice and vernal equinox around the 4th of February. So if you're born in January, you go back the number before that. So if you're born in January of 1956, what you would find is your number would be a 9 rather than an 8. Okay, and the numbers go in a descending order during this time period. And really what it is that Michio is describing that because you'll find, for example, in Feng Shui, there is what's called the Minghua, and the Minghua calculation for women is different from men. It'll be an opposite, and it's in the back of my book, my 9-star key book. But the thing is, what Michio was saying, and it's very evident at this time, is he said, we are in a very, very young or very, very rapidly intense period in terms of our galactic cycles. And so in terms of the galactic cycles, we are in a Bronze Age, according to Ayurveda. So in that respect, what it is it's a very, very intense time. And therefore, this way of calculating for men and for women is the most effective way of doing it. So you see that. And then what I had is the exception is, let's say, for example, you add up the numbers, they end up being a 10, okay? 1 plus 0 is 1. You subtract that from 11, you end up with a 10. There's only 9 numbers in 9-star key. So you add 1 plus 0 and you end up with the number 1. So the number 1 is whenever the numbers add up to a 10, and then it explains it there. So it's very easy to figure out when that happens. Then below that, what you will see is I have now given you the element in terms of the 5 elements, as well as the more yin or yang aspect of them in terms of being masculine or feminine, okay? This has nothing to do with gender preference. This has to do with a more yang or yin tendency, which then manifests itself in however which way it manifests itself in your particular life. So I've met as many, women with masculine numbers as I've met men with feminine numbers, and it goes back and forth. So there's nothing really to think about in that respect. But what you are looking at is these are the elements that are connected to you, as well as the more yin or yang aspect with masculine being yang, feminine being yin. I realize that in terms of Chinese medicine, they talk about it being the opposite, but there's a difference in macrobiotics. And this is oftentimes a discussion that people in macrobiotics get into a discussion with people that study Chinese medicine. And what I explain to them is there's a difference between structure and function. So for example, a structure might be yang, but its function will be yin. Okay, so for example, the spleen is a dense, thick organ. It moves slowly. It is considered more yang. Okay, all right, but its action is very, very slow, which is more yin. The density is yang, the slowness of its movement is yin. So the same thing applies. We are looking at macrobiotics at how things move, how things change, not necessarily how things are. So we're dynamic. We change every month, we change every year. And therefore, it's very important to understand how these elements work in a very dynamic, moving way. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't organs associated with every one of these elements in the same way that macrobiotics looks at the elements. So, for example, if you look at the element of water, water, it is related to the bladder and the kidneys. It is related to the bone structure. It is related to your autonomic nervous system. That is a given in the water element, okay? And if this is your year number, chances are those systems in you are strong. They are stronger. If this number is a month number, that's different. So I'm going to go to the next chart so you can figure out what your month number is. So here we are. This is a 9-star key chart for the year, for the months. So what it is this. Let's say you've already made your calculation. You've made your calculation. You know what your year is. And you look at that top section. It says when your 9-star key birth year number is, that it shows a 1, 4, 7, a 2, 5, or 8, or 3, 6, and 9. And then what you do is you go down, you look at the far right, which is for birthdays between. Okay. Therefore, what you look at is find your birthday on that right side and go to the box to the left of that is under the column associated with your year. So for example, if you were born between February 4th and March 5th, okay? And you go across and your number is, for example, we said an 8, and it says a 2, 5, and 8 in the middle. Your 9-star key second number would be a 2, okay? So it's very simple. There's no easy way to calculate this. This is in the books. And the reason why it's in the books is because it's hard to remember this unless you've done it for years like I've done. It just comes into my head. Sometimes I get confused on the cusp days between the 4th and 5th or the 6th and 7th, but that's because I forget, okay? But for the most part, if it's in the middle of the month, it's relatively easy to figure out. So another example of that, let's say you're born in 1954, which would be a 1 water year, okay? And let's say your birth date is September the 13th. So you go down between September 8th and October 8th, you go across and it says 147, you go down that column, your second number would be a 1 as well, okay? So it can be that your numbers are the same. They can also be the same element, but a different number. So for example, wood has got 2 numbers, 3 and 4. Metal's got 2 numbers, 6 and 7. Earth has got 3 numbers, 2, 5, and 8. The only ones that are solitary are fire and water. And that's because they are the most intense and most compact in their own way. So this would give you a way of calculating it. But let's go down the various elements now in terms of the organ systems. So let's say we're talking with 1 water. If 1 water is your dominant number, chances are, unless you have had some kind of major life crisis or intervention where let's say your self-actualization is being threatened by any number of forces, and it can be, but for the most part, our weaknesses happen in our second number. So if 1 was your second number, you would find weaknesses related to the bladder, related to the kidneys, related to the autonomic nervous system, possibly in the bone structures, also in relation to hearing. Those things might be challenges to you with respect to that second number. Now let's go to the number 2, which you could also say, in the numbers 2, 5, and 8. So we're going to cover all those at once because those are all earth elements. Okay, so the earth element relates to the spleen, the stomach, the pancreas, and the lymphatic system. So what you could say is if 8, 2, or 5 are your dominant number, your year number, chances are those systems show the least amount of stress in terms of your body, okay? Overall, if a 2, 5, or 8 are your secondary number, then you would find that those elements, those organs and those systems, the lymphatic system, the spleen, stomach, pancreas, may be signs where you see distress, okay? And we all know in macrobiotics that I describe it as the lemming law. The lemming law goes like this. If we are feeling weak, and out of balance, we tend to get attracted to those things which further that imbalance. It just happens that way. So a little bit of sweetness is good for the spleen. A lot of sweetness is bad for the spleen, okay? So it's like a little bit of salt is good for the kidneys and bladder. A lot of salt is really bad for the kidneys and bladder. So when we have an imbalance, we get attracted to things in ways that are dysfunctional, okay? So that's 2, 5, and 8 in terms of the organs that are related to it, and also the quality of taste, where our taste can go off. This is something, if you go to the more advanced studies in 9-star key and the 5 elements, and you look at the cycles of death, and the first system in dying that shows any sign of distress is our inability to taste foods properly. That is letting us know that the vitality of the spleen is being lost. And as a result, what's going on is our taste buds begin to deceive us. And that's the first sense to really go, is our sense of taste. Now, let's move it on. Let's move it on to, we went to 2, 5, and 8. Let's look at 3 and 4, which are related to the wood element that you know it by. It's also called tree. In Ayurveda, it's called ether or space, okay? What you can say is, we all know in 9-star key or macrobiotics, we talk about the element of tree or wood being the beginning of everything, okay? So you think of the idea of in the beginning was the word. Therefore, these are the most chatty people for one thing. I'm a 3 tree, by the way. But also what it is it makes sense that there are the most number of names for this beginning. You know, how many names does God have? You know, what does the beginning look like with respect to names like that? Okay, so now with 3 and 4, it's the liver and the gallbladder. It has to do with sight. It has to do with connective tissue, muscles, ligaments, tendons, those systems of the body. So if you are a 3 or 4 person, those systems, if that is your adult number, are relatively strong. And you find actually that you thrive more when you are doing more exercise in your life. It just feels natural to do it. But when you are a 3 or 4 as a secondary number, you may be a bit lazier, okay? And as a result, what happens is that those particular systems, the liver, which gets sluggish when we don't necessarily move things through. I have a very interesting thing. There are times, and it's something I observe for myself, it's an anecdote which might be useful for some of you, is that if I have too much in the way of oily things, or I decide for whatever reason, because it's been really hot here up until very recently, and I might have a beer. And then what happens is I end up having a headache that I get in the middle of the night. It starts around between 2 or 3 at night, which is the time of the liver and gallbladder, between 11 and 3 in the morning. So it begins to activate. And what I realized, I mean, I used to think, oh no, I've got a headache, what should I do? The simplest thing I do is when I get up, I exercise. As I begin to move my muscles, I begin to deplete that congestion in the liver, and I'm fine. My headache goes away automatically. All right. So 3 and 4s, you need to be aware of that, but these are the organs that would be stressed. Okay. We haven't even talked about emotions yet, because let's face it, at this time we are in a time of extreme crisis. I'll get back to this in a moment though. Let's finish the rest of these elements. So we did 1, we did 2, 5, and 8. We did 3 and 4. Now let's do 6 and 7. 6 and 7 are the elements of metal. In Ayurveda, it's called the element of air. I would explain that, but there's a reason why those two come together. It's related to the lungs. It's related to the large intestine. It is related to our skin and our breath, obviously. The prana, the chi, the quality of the breath that we take in is so important for the health of our lungs, obviously, and our large intestine. And also has a great impact on our skin, because our skin is an organ that ingests. It breathes in, it breathes out, it takes in, it eliminates. Okay, it's an organ of ingestion and elimination. In the same way the lungs and large intestine are. So if you are a 6 or 7 metal person in year, again, like I said, these will be strong. If you're looking at it from the standpoint of it being a secondary number, your month number, chances are these are where you will find your stress points, okay? So this is a general rule of thumb in 9-star key. Your organs associated with your year number should be strong, unless there is a critical way in which your life has been challenged. More than likely, in terms of your secondary number, it has to do with your first 18 years of life, and whenever you find yourself in stressful circumstances, that number is more conditioned by the year. So because it's more conditional, it is more susceptible to challenges that you may experience. So, stress. Now, those things can happen, obviously, in macrobiotics. We understand that in terms of foods. But something we don't necessarily talk about as much, which I think we need to, and this is something that's very present in all Oriental forms of healing, is that mind precedes body. Mind always precedes body. So when we are fearful, when we are overly cautious, those emotions are associated with the element of water. So therefore, when you are fearful or cautious and you recede or you contract more than you need to, you probably also look for things which support that contraction. Think about salt. Things that really contract things too much. I mean, think about salt with respect to how it opens and dissolves ice, but in too much, it has too contracting an influence on us. So suddenly what you find in that situation is you're attracted to salted nuts, to pretzels, to more tamari, to adding an extra half teaspoon of miso, maybe more seaweed than you're normally used to doing, but you suddenly just go that way. And that has to do with fear, super cautiousness, okay? Which I would imagine in these particular time periods, if you're living in America, it's kind of obvious all of us are kind of having, waiting for the second shoe to drop on November 2nd. We don't know what's gonna happen. 9-star key-wise, it's gonna be Biden. That's how it's gonna be. Whether the other guy leaves office, that's another question altogether. But that's another discussion, okay? So, but you're looking at the fact that fear
Robert,
is there.
can you say another few words about 9-star key-wise? Why Biden?
9-star key-wise, I believe he's an 8, if I'm not mistaken. Does anybody ever, I oftentimes I keep these things more present, but I looked at it originally and I mean, for example, when Trump won, I knew Trump was going to win. I knew that. And I told everybody Trump was going to win. Everybody thought I was nuts. In this case, I've been looking at Biden since last January. And really, he is best positioned in terms of 9-star key. He really is. The only thing that's, and to some extent what you're looking at is that the American election is happening in a 9-month, okay? 9 is sitting in the middle of the chart, which you would think in terms of 9 sitting in 5, fire in terms of Earth is a supportive relationship. But the number 5 is about reckoning. The number 5 is about karma. That's what the number 5 is. So for example, in terms of 9-star key, what you find is every 9 years, you have a karmic report card that comes due. Okay, so in that regard, but it happens monthly as well. So in this particular case with our current president, his 9 is sitting in the house of 6. And think of the amount of history that has been coming out about this guy's life. 6 also has to do with accounting. So guess what they're doing? They're also looking at all of his taxes. That's what's going on. Okay, did anybody find Joe Biden's birthday out there? Anybody have it? I could look at it myself, but one of you just put it in the chat so I can look at it a little bit more closely, and I'll make more straight commentary about it. But I'm just shooting from my hip right now because I know it, but I don't remember his birthday. Anyway, yeah, at some point, Gannat, if you want to put that in the chat, that's fine. Or if someone wants to just shout out his birthday, I can calculate it in my head. That's no big deal. Okay. But let me move on. Let's continue on with this particular discussion, though. Okay, and then we'll go to our election at the very end. All right. So 1, water, fear. 2, 5, and 8. We're looking at the emotion of empathy. That's what the element of Earth allows us to have, is an empathic connection to the world. Okay. And excuse me. In terms of that empathic connection, there's a natural sense of sadness that can be there, okay? Because the Earth is like Earth Mother. And although each one of the numbers has a different function, the 2 functions very different from an 8, and there's a very different in terms of a 5. And by the way, if anybody in 9-star key has ever told you that if you're 5, that as a man you should choose an 8, or a woman should choose the 2, it's just wrong. Okay, there are qualities that are there, but 5 has got its own unique qualities that makes it kind of androgynous and gives you sort of like a greater scope of things, which is far greater than a woman being a 2 and a man being an 8. Okay, but what does happen when you are taxed and that sadness gets deeper, you can become depressed. And as you become depressed, suddenly it's kind of like the idea of when you think about feeling depressed, you don't necessarily think about miso soup. You might think about mochi. You think about something sweeter. Okay, it's a natural thing to get attracted to something that is more sweet. And the more sweet it goes, the more problem. It's very interesting. One of the things that happened when the lockdown started happening and the supermarkets were restricting people going in, there's a store in America called Trader Joe's. And I was standing and what they were commenting on, and I have a son-in-law who's a manager of a Trader Joe's. And he said that he saw people going in and they were buying wine and chocolate. They weren't coming in to buy food. They were buying bags of candy and wine because they got really depressed, really sad at a very, very deep level. So that's what happened. Sadly, what's going on in terms of our lymphatic system, if that happens, I mean, I would not be surprised. Happy Halloween, America. Interestingly enough, in the pandemic of 1917 and 1918, the city of Pittsburgh had a very, very low number of flu cases until Halloween, because the mayor decided he didn't want to disappoint the parents of the children, and he let everybody go out to go trick-or-treating. And what ended up happening was that suddenly Pittsburgh became one of the worst cities in America. So what I'm anticipating is suddenly a huge spike, because not everybody went trick-or-treating. A lot of people were sensible, but a lot of people weren't. But there was still a ton of candy that was out there. And so what happens is, what does that do? It messes up with your lymphatic system, okay? Messes with your blood sugar levels. And so your ability to really know what you need to eat really gets distorted. So what we will see is a spike in cases in the United States, and everybody's going to go, oh my goodness, how did that happen? And it's like, well, trick or treat. So 2, 5, and 8, to be aware that sadness and depression gives you a tendency to get attracted to those things, and also to become a couch potato, where suddenly what ends up happening is you just find yourself being way too exhausted and listless and sore everywhere, okay? Now, in terms of 3 and 4, which has to do with basically enthusiasm, energy, it's kind of like in many ways, a kind of optimism that can there, but you can also have a lot of anger. Anger is sort of like the opposite of intuition. Anger is about basically, anger is anger. And you can have frustration, and you can be frustrated about things, and you can be more insistent about things. But when it goes into anger and hostility, there's a Welsh saying, if you plan revenge, dig 2 graves, okay? When your mind goes in that direction and you are so intensely caught up in that anger and frustration, you get attracted to crunchy, oily things, eating more chips, wanting more tempura, whatever it is. There's an attraction to those things that are there. You would find with liver and gallbladder that suddenly has to do with sight. Suddenly you have oversights of things that go on. You're just not seeing things clearly. And you might sprain your ankle. Suddenly you're not looking where you're going. You bump into things. You end up with stiff, sore muscles as a result of bruising that comes from not really paying attention to where you're going, because you are too liverish, because you are so frustrated, okay? So then we look at the element of metal, 6 and 7 in terms of lungs, large intestine, and the skin, as I was describing, has to do a lot with your ability to reflect. It has to do with a strong sense of sentiment that can be there, but at the same time, and reflectiveness. But it can go into stages of grief and sorrow. And suddenly what ends up happening is that you are getting worn down more and more and more. And what happens as a result is you find yourself sighing. Or if you're a cigarette smoker, you're smoking more. Or if you stop smoking, suddenly what ends up happening is you have a feeling that you wouldn't mind a cigarette, okay? Or it could be things like dairy with respect to the lungs and large intestine, things that get attracted, or heavier foods, okay? Even more foods that are more like refrigerated for too long, and they're just heavy, and then they just sit in your system. So those can be the things that occur. And with lungs and large intestine, the thing to be aware of, and this is also what I would say the concern in terms of COVID, we benefit from being out in the air. And it was logical when there was the spring and I said, people will start feeling better as they get outside. But the problem is in that situation with this particular, and I had mentioned this in March and April. I said, this particular bug does not go away because of heat. A lot of bugs do. Being out in the heat and being in the air, bugs kind of go away. This one does not, because it's such a low level bug. And people's immune systems are so compromised in general. So there was a little bit of a lull, but not much. But now people are going inside. They're going to be breathing more inside air. Their amount of chi in their air is going to be diminished. And as a result, people will find that rather than having freshly cooked food like you've all been talking about, and how to re-energize food that has been cooked, because that's important too. How do you make it if someone is living on their own and cooking more quantity? How do you make it so that that food stays dynamic? It's a very, very important aspect in terms of knowing how to make leftovers vital, okay? Because as we go inside more, people will be doing that, all right? So we find that cold and that lack of chi and the inertness that happens from a more sedentary activity is going to be a crisis to lungs, large intestine. Therefore, people who know how to do brushing of your skin using a tawashi or a brush, brushing your skin will be a very important thing to do in the coming months. If you live in an apartment somewhere, get out a nice brush and do a brushing of your skin, and do it daily, okay? The other thing is, if you know breathing exercises, whether it is pranayama, whether it is things that you learned doing Do-in or whatever other form, or Tai Chi, keep those things going as much as you can with respect to your internal environment. I would say, especially if you're living in more inner environments, wear clothing that breathes. Don't wear synthetics. Wear more, it's kind of old macro stuff that makes sense. But as we're going into a season during a pandemic, these things become more critical, let's say. So let me look now at this one next chart, because right now I want to look at the charts where we are. So the chart that we're in is right here. We are in a 7-metal year right now, okay? So everybody needs to look at where their second number is, especially in this chart, okay? So for example, my 9, because my second number is a 9, I'm 9 fire. This is the house of 7 metal, okay? If all of you go to this chart in the middle, this is the basic chart. All these numbers are in their proper houses. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the houses as well as where the numbers are in a 5-year. But this 9 is in a 7-metal house. This 7 is in a 5-earth house. This 5 is in a 3-tree house, okay? So, for example, the people that I would say that need to watch in terms of stress especially are, in terms of 1 is sitting in a house of 8 earth. What is the relationship between earth and water? It's a challenge. And therefore people that have 1s as their secondary number need to take care of their lymph systems, need to make sure that the quality of water they're drinking is very good. It's very important not to drink cold liquids during this time, especially as we're going into the fall anyway. It just makes sense. But 1 is sitting in a house of 8, very challenging. 5, if you're a 5, a secondary number, it's in the house of 3-tree. So the relationship between tree and earth is a challenging one. Therefore, what you have to do is you again have to pay attention to your lymphatics, getting good exercise, getting good movement, because that's going to help that 5 earth not feel so challenged as well. And during this time, because earth and tree are in the same position, this is not a particularly good time for you to be drinking any alcohol at all. All right, just to pay attention to that. The number 6 is sitting in the house of 4. Okay. 6 and 4, number 6, okay, in the house of 4. This means for you, breathing is especially important. Getting out and doing things like yoga, things like Tai Chi, watching your consumption of good quality oils is very, very important. Making sure that your oil quality is good and light. And obviously a lot of green leafy vegetables, working with your basically your large intestine just makes a tremendous amount of sense. But you might need to even go lighter, simply because of that 4-tree influence. We're moving out of the summer, so the world of salads is disappearing unless you're in Israel or you're in California. But other than that, a lot of you have got to deal with things like cabbages and broccolis and things. A lot of green vegetables are very, very important to you in this time. The number 4 is also being challenged here. I didn't know looking at 2 because earth and fire element are pretty good. 7 is this is metal in relation to earth. That's pretty good. 3 in relation to water. That's pretty good. Okay. But the number 9 and 4 are the ones I want to focus on. 4 sitting in the house of 2 means that you really do need to get out and exercise. It's very, very important for you to continue stretching, continue to do things like, if you can do exercises which put your legs higher than your chest, and being able to basically backwash your system is going to be very important during this time period. Again, not a good time for you to indulge in any kind of alcohol, especially things like wine, which in California is a challenge because we are the wine state. We are the place of fantasies, marijuana, wine, and movies. It's all California, okay? Finally, 9 fire. 9 fire sits in a 7 metal house. So, for example, I am very, very conscious in this time period of, I do a lot in yoga, I do a lot of inverted postures to work with my circulation, which is 9 fire, but also 7 metal large intestine gets benefited from doing inverted yoga postures. So I'm doing a lot more of that. I am watching also that spicing is very, very good for the fire element. Too much is not good, but for 7 metal, actually, spicing like things like with ginger and garlic are good. So therefore, in this combination, I am watching that I have foods that are a little bit more tasty in that direction. But I'm really watching, especially things like having, in my particular case, with fire, it's good to have a good quality. In Ayurveda, one of the most important medicines is hot water. Okay, macrobiotics don't talk about it very much. We think about bancha tea or something like that, and we think about minimizing water. But hot water, about 10 minutes at the end of a meal, after a meal, will actually begin to stimulate your digestive fire. Okay, that relates to your the element of 9 fire, which is your metabolic heat. The other thing in terms of weight loss in the morning, and I would say especially if you are more sedentary and living indoors as you get into winter, wake up in the morning and just make a cup of hot water. It'll help you to break things down, help you to eliminate things more easily during this time period. So I know I've talked for like 45 minutes, which is not hard for me to do, but I'm happy to open this up to questions. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm just going to get back to being with y'all. So I don't know, how do you, yeah, Trump is, I know that. Yeah, Joe Biden is he's a, so he's a 4. Okay, yeah, I believe he's a 4-8. Yeah, he's a 4-8. So 8 is sitting in the house, 6, 4. So 8, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2. All right. So what we're looking at in this particular time period is that 4 is sitting in the house of 2. The advantage for Biden in this time period is it gives him a sense of sensitivity. And the 8 for him connects him to, actually what's interesting, and I said this actually, this is the reason why I said this in the beginning, where Biden's numbers are, is in 9-star key, the house of 2 is considered the house of the primal mother. And the number 6 is the house of the primal father. So Biden is the house of the parents. He is, and I said, what our country needs is Grandpa Joe. We need a grandpa. We need someone who can step in as a parent and say, don't worry, things are going to be okay. If you look at this 9-fire month, it's perfect for Biden. 4 is sitting in the house of 9-fire, which is why he's getting more attention right now. All right. So that's very, very good. 8 is sitting in the house of 4. Biden makes gaffes all the time. So what happens is sometimes he gets carried away with his language. Doesn't really matter that much because his 4 is sitting in the house of 9. So that gives him a tremendous amount of charisma at this time. Now, Kamala is a 9-fire as well, which gives her charisma. And this is actually interesting looking at it for her. 9 and the second number for her is, let me just see. Her second number is a 6. Her second number is a 6. So if we're looking at this particular situation in this time period, she has to deal with, in the same ways, a kind of reckoning that Trump does. But what's different for her is the 9 is a feminine number. She's female. It's sitting in the house of 7. It allows her to connect with people. And the 6 is sitting in the house of 4, which means it's a challenge for her. It's a challenge for her. But in this particular month, which we're looking at the 9-fire month, 6 is sitting in the house of 2, which means she has a very reassuring presence. That's the thing that's going on. So in that regard, like I said, my personal view is that that's the way the election's going to go. But then we still have got until the 20th of January. And there's going to be a lot that can happen between now and then. Any questions though? Anything you want to ask, Kanad?
Can I ask a question?
Who?
When you showed that paper with the boxes with the 9-star key numbers,
Yes.
I didn't understand the significance of the different boxes. That's quite a new concept for me.
What it is that I look at where all the numbers move. The basic chart is the chart that has the 5 in the middle, right? But the year that you were born, what year were you born?
1953.
53. So 1953, you're a 2 Earth. Okay,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
In 1953, the number 2 was in the house of 5.
Well,
So
how do you know that from that chart you
Well, that's
showed?
basically how it is. Any number that's in the middle is in the house of 5. So in 1952, which is me, I am a 3 tree. My 3 was in the house of 5.
What I'm not
Always that
understanding,
way.
what I'm not understanding is where did those boxes, like, are those boxes associated with years?
Yeah, that's what I've done. I basically made it so that where all the elements are for every year are in those particular positions. And that gives you a lot of insight in terms of the different organ systems of your body, what will be stressed and what will not be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really, really interesting. Your talk is really interesting. Thank you.
Good. And what I can do, Kanad, if you want, Kanad, I'm happy to send you this whole PDF format. I mean, this is like stuff that I teach for a course in the Bay Area. a 9-star key, but a lot of it is useful for everybody. So I'm happy just to send you a
Yes,
file.
thank
So if you want to contact, I mean, you can contact me directly if you want. I do readings as well as, you know, books and whatever. But you can also get it from Gnat, but I'll make it available. You can either come to my website or you can come to Gnat's.
Can you do 9 fire for the emotions, please?
Oh, I didn't, did I?
No.
No. 9 fire has to do with basically excitement, enthusiasm. For some reason, hold on, I'm gonna hold on. 9 fire has to do with enthusiasm. It has to do with excitement. It has to do with joy in its positive sense. When joy is lost, what happens is we become anxious. So anxiety is the challenging emotion related to fire. And therefore, when we see anxiety going up, which is what's happening right now, I imagine if some of you or some people have like blood pressure cuffs at home, they are noticing their blood pressure being a little bit more elevated during this time period. Why? Because there's a sense of anticipation, okay? Our heart is in our mouth. We do not know what is going to happen at this point, all right? So we are, and to some extent, here's what's also interesting. You have to realize that behind your heart, you have what are called mirror neurons. There's more information that goes from your heart to your brain than from your brain to your heart. So when we feel things, we feel in the heart, and then we draw conclusions that go up to our heads. We are, in many respects, in the Orient, they talk about the heart mind. So in this situation, when we see, it is also a truth mechanism. It's like 9 fire. 9 fire people have a tendency to be blunt about the truth. Okay? There's a quality of bluntness that's there. So what goes on is, the reason why that is we get hit. When we walk into a room, we can feel if people like us or they don't like us. We know it, okay? The mirror neurons on our heart just start tingling away, send a message to the brain, you know, and that's the way it goes, okay? So we have to realize is that what I tell people is we all know what's going on. Our hearts never deceive us, but we just agree not to blow each other's cover. We know what's going on all the time. We can feel what's going on all the time, but then our head doesn't want to agree with what we necessarily see. So what else?
Okay, well, if you can send that file to me, then I'll make
Yeah.
it available to everyone.
Yeah, and
That
like
would
I
be great.
said, I mean, I'm easily found online. So if anybody wants to contact me for whatever, I'm happy to do that. I do, like I said, I do readings.
What
Number-
about the 3rd number?
The 3rd number, that's a whole other discussion, because the way in which Simon Brown does it, the way in which John Sandiford did it, is not the way I do it. I do it more in keeping with my friend Rex LaSalle. And we had a different way of looking at this. We look at rather than the 3rd number being a tendency number, that's very, very superficial actually. So people look at and go, like Bob is a 3, 9, and my 2nd number would, my 3rd number would be an 8 in terms of a tendency number. But in my chart, it's a 2. And it has more to do with my character. When I'm under stress, that which relates to the way in which I do the calculation is more accurate than me coming across as an 8 Earth. It's much more 2. I worry too much.
So the first
By the
number,
way,
the first
by
number
the
is
way,
what
I'll
you
just mention, Susan, excuse me, I'll just mention quickly, Rex is going to be speaking next month on December 1st. So we'll get a chance to hear him. Go ahead.
So just to reiterate, the first number is what you are up until the age of 18. The second number, what would that be? And the third number is your 10
The first
your
number
hair-
that we calculated is your number for life.
number for life.
Your second number relates to the month you were born. That number is more active, generally speaking, in the first 18 years of your life. Doesn't mean that your number isn't functioning, but because the second number is more conditioned, it's more like it takes its marching orders from its parents, like we do, okay? So that's why that second number is more conditioned by our environment, by our social structure. And then there is our year number, which is when we finally come into our own. And some of us live our whole lives in our second number. Or there can be time periods when our second number, because of whatever crisis that emerges, becomes more dominant in our lives. That's when Macrobiotics talks about function rather than structure. That's what's important. That's why seeing how these numbers move and see how they interact with the other elements makes them much more dynamic. The system is incredibly potent. It's a very, very useful system. And like I said, anything a more advanced astrological chart can give you, a really detailed 9-star key chart will offer you.
Can you please put a contact for Robert into the chat? Because when I Googled him, I found like 1 billion of his books, but not a contact URL.
I'll do that right now.
Thank you very much.
And then also, if you go to my most recent website, which is thepathofcivility.com.
That's the one I'll list right now.
Thepathofcivility.com. It has all my books. It has bio, but it has contact information as well.
Well, Robert, thank you so much.
It's great seeing some of you again, and it's great meeting some of you for the first time.
Great. Well, you did a masterful job. It's not easy to take a life study and distill it into a few minutes.
And all I did was distill a little bit of it.
You're right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.